Recording in progress.
Hey, Julia, everybody's doing a group activity right now, so you can just chill, and then I'll start lecturing in about 10 minutes or so.
Thank you.
Great. So people are moving back to their seats. I'm guessing this means you are good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and share my Zoom screen. All righty. So we'll start with the near-death experience group. So it'll help if I actually turn on the. Well, this is coming up. As I call an age group, we'll have, it could be one group member, or you can kind of bounce between group members. Have you all summarize in a couple sentences what your scenario was, and then just dive right into your questions. So near-death experiences group, what was your scenario about?
Here's the Reproduction in the 70s who did extensive interviews with about 50 people who had come close to death or had died or been revived, and they reported different specific experiences, but all kind of the same thing of watching themselves as they're dying and then proceeding to an afterlife. And then some other studies after that have also kind of corroborated.
Alrighty, so what was Dr. Moody's hypothesis?
So we decided that people are likely to have a glimpse of life after death during a near-death experience.
Yeah. Alrighty. And what evidence supports this hypothesis?
First-hand reports.
Yeah, so this would be equivalent to what we typically would call a case study, going from there. All right. And what type of evidence would help to disprove or at least not support this hypothesis?
Real scientific evidence that this happens.
Yeah. So this one, of course, all three scenarios are things that it's like, well, I don't know if we can prove it, but I don't know if we can disprove it either, right? So Dr. Moody, thinks that these are real, and stuff that might help disprove it is, maybe we could find a more concrete way to test this. Of course, then you'd have to know when someone's going to have an out-of-body experience and like prepare them for it. Here are the things we want you to look for, right? So I guess if you could find a way to induce this experience in the lab, you wouldn't want to almost kill someone, but I don't know. Maybe if you gave them hallucinogenic drugs or something like that under a carefully monitored environment, right? You could replicate some of this. Or, could there be other things going on? Are there maybe brain-based things that could account for this? I think of the movie Phenomenon with John Travolta, and this is like spoilers for a movie from the 90s, so apologies. But in it, he like thinks he sees like an alien spaceship and then develops powers, and it turns out, I don't know how it explains the powers, it's a movie. But if he has a brain tumor, and like the reason he saw the light is because it was like close to his occipital lobe. So that certainly can happen. Yeah. So you can see how some of these questions might be tricky, right, to start to think about. Okay, psychic traveling group, tell us about your scenario.
Our scenario pretty much is about people having kind of like with the other group, an out-of-body experience, but not through death, more it seems through hypnosis and being able to see scenes that are even really far away from them.
All righty. And what's the hypothesis presented in your scenarios discussion?
If you're not going to see realistically enough, you're saying it's not to actually be there or something.
Sure. What evidence supported it? It could be Will or anybody else in the group. Sure. And how about what type of evidence would help to disprove it? Right, yeah. Again, it's like, can we get them to be in a space where we could objectively decide whether they're right or wrong?
Well, another idea that was also mentioned was while they're in this translate state, to add some kind of stimulus to where their physical body is. So they would see what happens then.
Yeah. So the person who came up with the answers for this. It's just like, there's no evidence. I mean, I think you all articulated what he thinks is the evidence, what the researcher thinks is the evidence, right? Yeah, report on the stimuli at the remote location. You know, exactly what you were just saying about, you know, can they respond to questions or something physical at that time? And, you know, this is something that'd be cool to do in an fMRI study, right? Put them in a brain scan, see what happens. Now, there is a lot of evidence about the power of imagery, right? So even just from basic cognitive psychology, if you were to you sort of envision in your head how you get from here, like outside the, right over here on this platform, right? And I asked you to sort of envision it, that would take you a shorter amount of time than if I asked you to envision walking from here to Greer, right? Because your mind is actually sort of mentally mapping and mentally transversing that. It wouldn't take you the same amount of time as actually walking there, right? But it does sort of adjust that way. We also know, oh yeah, Debbie.
I also kind of work with guided imagery. My mom, she goes in the NICU and then in the rehab unit, she used to do guided imagery with kids to help distract them from pain or procedures or, you know, help them sleep or whatever.
Exactly. So yeah, this is actually a big part of meditation, and meditation is actually something that does have psychological science behind it. And actually, in addition to helping people reduce their anxiety or things like Debbie was mentioning, actually changes you physiologically, like it can help lower your blood pressure and things like that. And so, yeah, you know, doing that type of imagery can like take people out of space. It can also help them motivationally. So like athletes do a lot of imagery in terms of like imagining doing the move, you know, let's say it's shooting a basket, I don't know, flip-flops on the beam and gymnastics, right? Winning your race in track and field. That actually does help because it's like mental rehearsal. It's not as good as physical rehearsal, but like kind of does the same thing. Like your brain goes through the same steps, even if your body isn't. So yeah, I think there is something to this idea. Obviously, whether this whole like psychic traveler thing is true, right? But you know, we can take elements from everything. All right, the apocalyptic beliefs group.
So basically, the summary of it is basically this whole led by that she could contact extraterrestrial beings and know things that were happening. And so basically, she predicts how extraterrestrial beings tell her that they're going to end the world and that they can turn all this to save the world.
Yeah, yeah. This is not that uncommon in cults to have some beliefs similar to this. So that some higher power, actually often alien related, although sometimes it's just, you know, sort of a godlike figure, right? It can help or save you. So Heaven's Gate had a big piece of this. It's probably debatable whether Scientology is a cult. You could apply the criteria, but certainly they have beliefs about alien life forms as well. So what hypothesis have her followers formed about her?
Basically, if Mrs. Peach comes into contact with extraterrestrial beings, then she will know about it.
Exactly, yeah, that they think that she does have these like prophetic abilities. She is communicating with these aliens. Yeah. Hey, Damani, do you want to take the next one? What evidence supports her hypothesis?
I mean, they went to the designated spot where extraterrestrial people said no, and they did that. So I guess they were saved in the way.
Right. If for nothing else, then like the world wasn't actually ending, right? And how about what's the evidence that can be used to disprove this hypothesis or not support it? Either one of y'all or anybody else in here. Oh, go ahead.
No evidence of things like beings.
Right, right. And obviously, whenever we say something like this, it's not that we're saying there's no other life in the universe. Like it's very likely there is other life. It'd be sort of absurd if we were the only planet with life in the universe, right? But to have them here would mean a whole bunch of things, right? They would have to be technologically advanced enough to create things for space travel, right? To travel probably light years and light years and light years, right? To get here, to care enough about us, right? To like try to communicate with us and save us, right? And not to say again that all these things couldn't happen, but it's unlikely, right? So yeah, their evidence that they have is what Mrs. Kesh, I don't even know how you pronounce it, I like quiche, reports. And, evidence against it, if she keeps predicting apocalyptic events and they don't happen. But there are cult leaders who do this all the time, right? So the whole 2012 thing, like the Mayan calendar ended then just because they ran out of space, right? And they just didn't keep going. But that meant the world was going to end then. Or there's always someone saying, I remember in the 90s hearing about a guy who was like, the world's going to end on this date. And we're all still here, right? I feel like there's at least one of those a year. Right?
There's a conspiracy theory going around now that the world actually did end in 2012, and that now we're all just kind of living in this apocalyptic black hole.
Maybe that's why there's that sign. I don't know if anyone has gotten off Northampton to get here. If you get off 264 or 64, yeah, at Northampton. There's a little yellow sign that I can never get the full gist of because it's a lot for a sign you drive by really quickly. But it says leave the matrix. Something about working for this person will be better than your job, I guess. But yeah, there are definitely always ideas about that. And some of these can be pretty harmless. It sounds like Mrs. Keish's was. But unfortunately, in some scenarios, this becomes not so harmless. People lose all their money, right? Because they give it to the cult. There are cults that are abusive to the people in them. Things from physical beatings to making young children get married, things along those lines. And in the extremist scenario, and this, I think either today or sometime this week is Suicide Awareness Day. There are times when these are involved in mass suicide. So the Heaven's Gate cult is an example of this, where they really thought they needed to end their lives to go to this different plane, right? And I don't know, who are we to say their souls aren't there, but certainly their bodies are, right? So, yeah, HBO has a really good but sobering docuseries about Heaven's Gate. I watched a lot of depressing stuff during the pandemic. I think it was just mood. But yeah, so you can start to see how this stuff permeates, and it can feel tangential, right? It can feel oh, this is only a few people, right? But then you get to something like Scientology, where, hey, it's not everybody, but there's a lot of people who are involved in the Church of Scientology, right? And again, they're giving all their money, all their time, depending on how sort of far they are into the organization. Oftentimes their children are sent to work camps, basically, right? And so these things can have these implications. And there are even sort of more mainstream religions within every faith tradition. There are congregations that would sort of meet this definition, right? Where they ask people to essentially, I think the Bible says, or at least agreement has been, you should tithe about 10%, right? And there are people who are no, you need to give us all your money, basically, right? I think of these televangelists who are Lord, get me another private jet. Really? I think you've got other things to worry about, right? But yeah, so there is, and it's the power of persuasion, and it is, how seductive these ideas are, not in a sexual way, but just in a people feel like these things solve their problems or give them hope, right? And I think a lot of that plays into digital literacy in your readings for today as well. Oh, by the way, I went in and I adjusted. I hadn't realized Perusal's auto grading wasn't giving points if people turned in things late, even though I want to. So it's going to regrade them today, and your grades should go up if you did stuff late. So just heads up on that. I adjusted the grading scale there. Which also means if you haven't done the Perusal stuff yet, you can obviously make time to do it. The other thing I wanted to say is make sure you're clicking on the individual assignment from Blackboard to get over there. I think only a couple people have had this issue, but it's no big deal. I'll just have to hand enter your score into Blackboard if you don't do that. But it just makes all the integration easier if you click when you're on the Perusal page of Blackboard, just scroll down to like, okay, we're on Perusal 4 for Friday. Alrighty, I'm very much enjoying interacting with y'all on the Perusals. Hopefully you are as well. I'm like already like my mind is going in terms of like other classes I could use this technology for, because I think it's really great. So today we're going to start talking about digital literacy, which your textbook talks about tangentially, which is why we have these supplementary readings instead. That really start to get at the heart of things. And today I also have some activities. I've put the links for these on Blackboard if you want to go back and do these individually afterwards. But I figured we could kind of do them as a group, and they might be fun that way as well. Alrighty. So your first reading talked about all the different types of digital literacy, and there are 5, at least that they identified. Certainly this is one group's perspective, right? I'm sure there are other people who would, add or take away, but this is a nice way to sort of start framing it this way. So the first one they mentioned is photo-visual literacy. So this type of digital literacy helps people to read visual and written information intuitively and freely, helps them understand instructions and messages that are representing visual things. People who are good at this tend to be people with good visual memory and intuitive associative thinking. So they're people who can like make connections between things pretty quickly in their brains. This is a great skill to have as an academic, or really in a lot of fields of business world, if you can make connections real quickly to be like, oh, this thing that the client talked about last week will relate to this, and that'll make them feel like we're really listening to them. But sometimes it can be to your disadvantage. So like when I used to do therapy, I would make connections before the client. But a big part of doing therapy is getting the client to come to those decisions on their own, or those realizations. So you have to like guide them instead of just blurting it out like you want to. Look at how to help you. Synchronic literacy is part of this, and that's interactive stories and digital, digital, yeah, digital, that's supposed to be a T, not a C, game environments. So a lot of textbook related materials are starting to do things like this now. So for example, I know Dr. Martorell has worked on an interactive game where you like care for a senior and kind of see what their life is going on. I've done one that I use in my abnormal class that is, you're in the position of an interviewer and you have a therapist, and you have to like do the initial interview and try to figure out what's going on with this client in the room with you. This is also, if any of you have kids or babysit, things like that, this is like what ABC Mouse or Leapfrog are, right? Sort of these interactive things as well. I really like that they mentioned typing programs as being helpful with this too. I don't even know if this is like still a thing. When I was growing up, we had Typing Tutor. It was like a game, try to get a higher score. My friends in grad school really liked one called Typing Shark. And probably shouldn't tell you this, but when she was bored in class, she would do Typing Shark, so it looked like she was taking notes. I mean, don't necessarily recommend, but it will enhance your typing skills. So, 6 of one, half dozen the other. And also for some people, sort of having your hands doing something helps you focus. This is why some people knit, right, while they're listening to things. So yeah, photovisual literacy is essentially like you look at a page or you do an interactive activity and you understand, you can make the connections, but it's also about sort of being able to recognize when that's not helpful or maybe even deceitful. So I'm going to go to this website, but if anyone wants to go like on your phone, I did put on a QR code, but like I said, this is also linked in Blackboard as well. And so this is a website called Which Face is Real? So go ahead and click over here. So one of these faces is digitally created, and the other one is an actual photo. So how many people think the digitally created one is the woman? Right? How many think it is the guy? All right, so we got more votes for guy. So we will click there. Y'all are right. Woohoo! What made you think that that was the fake one?
I think for me, there were shadows on her face, and his granted probably like in a flash, but it just seems it would be harder to create a lot of shadows and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
Leaving a drop shadow on the guy behind him too, which is something you see a lot when you put a photo over another.
oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
You can see it really good.
Yeah, I do see that now that you put that out. Yeah.
I was being a little more skeptical, figuring they thought people would assume because there's another person in that picture that that would be the real one. So they wanted to kind of trick us with that.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. I think you guys are going to be much better at this than I was. I was like 50-50 maybe when I was doing these yesterday. All right. So which of these two do we think is real? Halloween Child or the woman? So how many people would say Halloween Child is fake? And how many people would say the woman is fake? All right. We got some hands for that one. So let's give it a whirl. Oh, I'm supposed to click on the person who's real. No, my bad. Not responding anyway. So there we go. All right, so that one is real. So what made people think that that one was real versus the other one being fake?
For me, it's like the quality of the photos.
Hmm.
The first one, the fake photo was like very like sharp, and like the same with this one, like the real one, it's like sharp.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else that's stood out for people? All right, let's do one more and then I'll kind of show you more about this site itself and how they're doing this. All righty, so who thinks that gruff looking person is real? And who thinks that person holding up 108 is real? All right, so we got some hands for 108. All right, it's loading just slowly. Yep, you are correct. Okay, so why did she look more real than the gruff person?
Guy, it's clear there's like shine, all of them kind of had that like bright shine kind of to them.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think you all are already probably pretty savvy at this. Folks who haven't grown up with like Photoshop on everything and digital manipulations like you all have might struggle with this more, right? And might think that, well, it's a photo, so it has to be real. What do you mean one of these people isn't real, right? So just to show you a couple things about this, you know, part of this is about how people represent themselves and identity online. Part of this is about manipulation of photos to trick people into thinking like a famous person did something, right? I do like this cartoon on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog, right? Like in theory, we could have sentient dogs sitting behind the keyboard. And so essentially their idea was, we know that there are digital images that are manipulated. So they actually have an algorithm that does this. And so they have this face generation software that they use. They're attempting to generate artificial images indistinguishable from real photographs. And then they also have one that's like trying to tell the difference. So it's essentially these two networks train each other. They're using them for things like espionage, so spying. And so they feed all these images in, and so then on the website, they have one real one and one from this collection. Oh, one real one from the collection they fed in, and then a synthetic one that's created by this system. And there's a whole website of these called "This Person Does Not Exist," or if you want to go sort of look at these. So, I mean, these are just people who are trying to educate people, and it seems like, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't totally easy, but it seems like it was fairly easy for them to access this open source software, right, and do this. So other people are able to as well. The part where obviously this gets even scarier is when you get to something like deepfakes. So can anyone tell us what deepfakes are? All right, I can show it. So deepfakes are where you do this, but with video. There are AIs out there, artificial intelligence algorithms, where you feed in hours and hours and hours of video, which say like a politician would have readily available on the internet, right? Or even something like feeding in all the Star Wars movies Mark Hamill was in, and then creating a digital version of him that you may or may not use for a show. Again, spoilers, so I won't tell you which show. Right? So you could, using this technology, create a video where it looks like Donald Trump is saying that he's pro-abortion, or something like that. Or you could create a video that looks like, former President Obama is like yelling at people, right? Things along those lines. And there are tells right now, mostly because the technology isn't that great. But as the technology improves, as these AIs learn, right, this is going to get harder and harder to differentiate, which is kind of the scary part. So yeah, definitely recommend Googling deepfakes and kind of seeing what they are. And there are some good YouTube videos out there. The group I'm familiar with is Corridor Crew, so Corridor Digital. They do a lot of special effects stuff, but they will do stuff like educate about deepfakes. But there are lots and lots of different people on YouTube who will like explain about these things and show you what the images look like and things like that. So yeah, we can't even believe what we see anymore right online in this day and age. All right, so the next type of digital literacy that your reading covered is reproduction literacy, right? So it's super easy to just copy paste something in our day and age. And really it has been for a while if you're a talented artist or you're a talented handwriting forger, for example, right? Things along those lines. What do you think are the pros and cons of the ease of replicating information like this? What are some good things about being able to do it? Yeah.
It's a lot easier to spread it to more people.
Right. So if it's something good that you want to spread, right? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That's also a very big con, because nowadays, a lot of the media that we consume is so contradictory and none of it gets fact checked, so people tend to just share what they want to share. We could be spreading a lot of misinformation.
Exactly, and we know that that's how a lot of this misinformation does get spread, right? The idea that people just sort of retweet things. I do like that Twitter has the thing now that if you're retweeting an article, it's like, do you really want to share this without reading it, right? It kind of makes you at least pause for a second. I doubt everyone does stuff with it, right? But yeah, that you can just sort of disseminate this and copy paste things and things along those lines. But again, this can happen. So I posted this in our perusal, but it was yesterday, so I don't know how many people got the chance to look at this. But this is us, and this is President Miller. So, and we knew this when we hired him. But yeah, he had this history of, I think it was like a speech he gave, yeah, that he just like copied someone else's speech without citing them. And like, it's so interesting because I did some more reading about this yesterday, because I just remember just sort of being outraged and knowing I couldn't do anything about it when he got hired, right? Faculty don't really get to help hire. There's usually like maybe one or two faculty on a hiring committee for a president. We don't get to have input. We don't even get to meet the person until they're hired. So it's the board of trustees who do this. And he was like brought up for review when this happened. And the board at the college where he was currently president basically said, yeah, this is bad, but he's really good for our universities, helping us stay open. So, and I sort of got the impression that was their when they were hiring him too, the idea that like, he'll help us financially, so who cares, right? Which is very frustrating to people who are trying to like enforce, right, academic integrity and honesty. I don't think that he has replicated this. I think he learned from his mistakes. But yeah, I mean, he refused to resign beforehand when he was accused. And yeah, one of you all plagiarized, right? And we caught it. You go up before the honor council. I've never heard of someone being expelled for that. Certainly, you can be like suspended for that, or have other punishments. And faculty even would end up, maybe losing our jobs as well, even though it's hard once you're tenured. But yeah, and again, do I think this makes him a horrible person or a horrible president? No. Do I think there are other things that might go into how good of a president he is? Yes. I should probably be like politically correct and leave it there. He's done some good things, but there have been some things that have suffered since he's been there, which is going to be the case with any president. But you all can make your own decisions as to how to weigh that balance, right? That's part of what we're doing, is talking about critical thinking and coming to your own decisions based on the evidence. So yeah, it's out there, it's simple, and people can just kind of get away with it sometimes. So what makes something original becomes one of the questions that come up here. So your book, or your reading, sorry, uses the example of Andy Warhol, right? So he like would do this with like famous celebrities pictures as well, like just make different pictures of Marilyn Monroe or things like that. But one of his more famous is the Campbell soup pan. So is this original? And what makes it original? This isn't like a art critique class, so understandable if you don't have that perspective to bring. But why do maybe I could flip it? Why do people really like the fact that he just painted soup can? Yeah.
Visually pleasing.
Yeah, it's something that's familiar. We really do like things that are familiar, right? So this is one of the reasons why companies will use celebrities to advertise products. Not only, they also have clout, right? But like, you're familiar with their face, so you're gonna immediately associate their face and whatever they have. It's like, oh, this is something that's safe and comfortable, maybe good as well. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think you could argue either way. There are people who hate Warhol, there are people who love Warhol, right? I mean, like, I can appreciate that at least he had this interesting idea, right, that other people hadn't thought of yet. Yeah, and his personal life is a whole other thing that you can certainly look into if you want to know more about him. But I think that's the case for many people who create art. As I was thinking about it, I was thinking about memes, right? So memes usually start by some person somewhere. It's hard to trace back, right? And then they just sort of proliferate, and sometimes you get versions that don't even make sense, right? Sometimes you get versions that are being used for things that like are not relevant anymore. I liked this one I have up here. This is one of my favorite meme, I don't know, genres. It's called Scumbag Brain. So the idea is often like, like, oh, I have time, I'm gonna get some good sleep. Scumbag Brain, like, let's remember everything from third grade. Things like this, like, This one was very meta. Oh, you want my help thinking up scumbag brain memes? Scumbag brain is just silence, right? So I think that this is a really nice example of reproductive literacy right now. I mean, it doesn't mean anything in the long scheme of things. I mean, there are people who study memes, so I'm sure they'd argue with me, right? But it's an example of who started this, what was the original intent, how is it being used now, that type of thing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, sort of quote tweeting or sharing, or the other thing that people tend to do is just copy pasting and not giving credit, right? And this has been a big issue with comedians online. So our more famous comedians will, instead of quote tweeting and giving credit to the like up and coming comedian, will just steal their joke essentially, and it's hard to prove. So that becomes an issue as well. So yeah, it's sort of like, can we trace back to where it actually started, or are we just sort of stuck with the copies? All right, so we'll end there for today. We'll keep talking about digital literacy. On Wednesday, we have some more fun activities to look at with that. You all can keep the assignments. I'm just going to give everybody who was here today credit for the in-class assignment. So y'all are good to go. And Julia, that includes you, even though you weren't able to do it. So.
Thank you.
Good luck with your class. I'll see you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there.
That's okay, I completely understand. Yeah, I'm for Dr. Jackson had to come like pick me up because my car was stuck, so I understand.
Have a good day.
You too.